So Shabbat Shalom. And we have Torah portion, Bechukotai. Bechukotai. And Torah portion, Bechukotai, it sounds really great starting off. And then all of a sudden we slide into not just a few curses, they're like the most horrible curses. And it's not like they're just curses, like they're running after you. They're finding you no matter where you are, whether you're in your exile, whether it doesn't matter where you go, these curses will find you. And I know especially our generation, we're conditioned, we only want to hear the positive reinforcement, right? We've all been taught, well, the way to get things done is through positive reinforcement, but that's not biblical. Sometimes there have to be boundaries, and sometimes there have to be consequences. And it just seems like consequences are selectively, imposed nowadays. All these people over here, they don't need consequences. Crimes don't bring consequences, or if they do, they're very minimal. They're just an inconvenience. It takes you an hour or two to bail out. But people over here, they have severe consequences. It just depends. In Hebrew, tilui, it depends. And so there's a balance there in the Torah portion of the blessing and the cursing. And once I realized I was teaching this weekend, which I didn't find out till later in the week, so I didn't have time to exclusively study the Torah portion, but it seemed as though that theme of chapter 26 and the cursing played very well into my lesson for this week and next week in the Zoom classes. And so what I wanted to really do is pull in, why is the Holy One so angry with us? I mean, something has clearly set him off. And if somebody gets set off to that degree, we want to know what set them off so we don't do that thing anymore. I mean, I was that way with my mom. If I knew what set her off, I didn't hit that button anymore if I could help it. I mean, she'd chase you around the house with a switch. So, and the Holy One could run a lot faster and longer than my mom could. So there's no place to hide. So just for the sake of those who are listening by audio, we'll repeat the scripture readings, and it's going to be Leviticus 26:3 through 27:34, Jeremiah 16:19 through 17:14, Psalm 105, and I added in this year James 3:5 through 12, because this is where he's asking the 12 tribes who are scattered abroad, can a fountain send forth at the same time sweet water and bitter? Because we want to have sweet fountains, don't we? We don't want to have bitter fountains. And so we're going to take a look again at chapter 26, and the blessings are great. Blessings are wonderful. Sounds like the Garden of Eden, doesn't it?
Yes.
But the curses, that sounds like a real minefield. And I think it is a minefield, but maybe not a minefield in the way that we're thinking. Maybe there's another way of looking at it as a minefield. So I'm just entitling this, The Answer Key to the Minefield of Curses. So why is there such a contrast in chapter 26 of Bechukotai? There's such loving care in the beginning, and there's horror in the curses. I mean, those are things you wouldn't want to happen to your worst enemy, much less you. But it's clear that the Holy One is chasing his people. This isn't what he does to the nations. Now, we are going to talk about the nations in the end. But first, he has to deal with his people, no matter where they are. And the clue that I found, and I found it, a lot of times I just don't have time to listen to other people's teaching, but if I can, I try to listen to Rabbi Foreman, and sometimes it might be 6 weeks after I'll get to it if I can. And this week he had a wonderful lesson on what's actually going on here. Why is it so harsh? And what he pointed out is how many times the increments of 7 show up, of why the land didn't have her Sabbaths, right? The Shemitah years, the years of release. And of course, if you're not observing your Shemitah years, then you're not going to be observing the Yovel year, that year of Jubilee, the year of that Yovel shofar. And if you're not observing those, I would say we can probably trace this disease all the way back to Shabbat and our weekly Shabbat. What happens on our weekly Shabbat, I believe, is going to be reflected in the Shemitah. It's going to be reflected in the Yovel. And so not only does he emphasize, I want my land to have her Sabbaths, to have her Shemitah years, to have her Yovel, linked to your behavior, because you didn't let her rest. And that tells us there's something about our behavior on earth, especially in the land of Israel, that is connected to something in heaven. If it were disconnected, he wouldn't be so bent out of shape about it. He would just say, do what you want to do. You're on earth, you're not in heaven. But he's not saying that. He's saying, you're on earth, I'm in heaven, and you have to do this, or you're going to suffer these severe consequences. You're going to suffer these horrors and you're thinking like, it's dirt. Why do you care what happens to dirt? He cares because of what's just above it and how he wants to marry us. It's all related to that, because we know that the Shabbat is the covenant sign, isn't it? It's the sign that we're married. We are betrothed to our bridegroom and we're waiting for him. He wants the bride to come back and to dwell in the garden with him, but he cannot as long as she abhors the rules that govern that garden. She just couldn't stay. It'd be like Adam and Eve. It's just going to spit you out. The same way he says the land is going to spit you out. If you misbehave in his land, it just vomits you out. Well, how can we sing all these wonderful songs about, going to heaven and so forth, but if your soul abhors the law of that kingdom, how would you ever be happy in it? You would not enjoy the garden at all. You would be miserable in the garden if you don't love his Shabbat, if you don't honor your spouse, if you like to steal from people, if you like to tell lies. That would be the last place you would want to be. So those Sabbaths, they're a weekly reminder of his plan to replant us in the garden so that we love what his soul loves. If we can love what he loves, then he can replant us. And so that 7, anybody listening to this list of curses at the end of the Torah would automatically associate those 7s, not just with the 7th day of creation, but with the Shabbat and the many instructions that go along with the Shabbat, the Shemitah, and so forth. You would just have to hear that number, just like you hear it in the book of Revelation. Everybody gets hung up on 666. It's about the 7s. Amen. In Revelation, he's trying to get you back. He's pursuing you, and it's a pretty hot pursuit from the sound of this chapter. So I wanted to teach it out of the Song of Songs. Maybe we can find out why the Holy One is so angry with his people. And we know that Shir HaShirim, or the Song of Songs, is a bridal song. It's a song of communication between the bride and the bridegroom. It's going to give us some clues as to why our bridegroom is going to be so angry, and then what we can do so that our relationship with him sounds more like what's in the Song of Songs. I would rather my relationship with him be like the way Song of Songs is describing it, not the way that it's being described in the Torah, in this week's Torah portion. So what I wanted to do is to string together, there's 10 references to the bride in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, and 6 of those references are found right in the Song of Songs. And so we say that's bridal neighborhood. If you want to know anything about preparing the bride, being the bride, behaving as the bride, the character of the bride, you would have to go to the Song of Songs. You would have to go to that neighborhood and find out how the bride lives in the Song of Songs. So the first song verse is going to be in chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And I went ahead and gave that full context of that neighborhood. And this should sound really familiar if we're thinking about the Garden of Eden. And when Adonai walked with Adonai, it's holech, right, is the word that's used there. It means to walk. They could hear his voice walking in the cool of the evening. So it says, until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense, which, if you'll remember, is associated with the Temple Mount. You are altogether beautiful, my darling, and there is no blemish in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. May you come with me from Lebanon. There's our first reference. So we know that it has to do with the fellowship that human beings had with Elohim in the cool of the day at the beginning, at the time of creation, before sin entered the world. And of course, Lebanon, that's going to represent an exile for us, if you're not familiar with that symbol. The next reference is in verse 9. He says, you have made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride. You have made my heart beat faster with a single glance of your eyes, with a single strand of your necklace. And we're going to come back to this one, and we're going to try to break it down to see. We know how to make maybe our spouse's heart beat faster. Do we know how to make his heart beat faster? There's something to think about there. Verse 10, how beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than all kinds of spices. And you'll notice there twice he's called her a sister. That's a relationship. Remember, this is a parable. The sister relationship is one where a brother and sister can be openly affectionate. They can be affectionate in public without worrying about people talking about it. And so he not only has love for his bride, he loves her like a sister. And in biblical times, brothers were very protective of their sisters, especially full sisters. You don't see as much half sisters, but full sisters, you can see that in some cases they were full brothers were more concerned even than fathers about the well-being of their sisters. So it's a close kinship. So it's not just love in terms of, romantic love. It's, I want to be openly affectionate with you. Verse 11 says, your lips, my bride, drip honey. Honey and milk are under your tongue. And the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. Right? And then, verse 12, a garden locked is my sister, my bride. A rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. So her fountain, her spring is sealed, and she is in a sealed garden. Could we agree that the Garden of Eden is sealed off right now? With two very frightening angels standing there to make sure it stays locked. But will it stay locked forever? No. And then this last reference here is chapter 5, verse 1. And look at the repetition. It's like it's a summary of the verses we just read. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, drink and imbibe deeply, O lovers. Right? So let's try to unpack this. Let's go back to, you have made my heart beat faster, my sister, my bride. You have made my heart beat faster with a single glance of your eyes, with a single strand of your necklace. And I hope by just saying the verses out loud, you've heard a lot of repetition. Have you been hearing things repeated, words or phrases? That's important. When things are repeated often, it's not just for emphasis, it will refer to something occurring in two separate time periods, two different fulfillments. And if you can see the slide, you can see that I also put it up there in Hebrew for you, for those of you who can read the Hebrew, because I wanted you to see the Hebrew word for eyes and the Hebrew word for strand, because these are the two single things. 1 + 1 = 2. It still equals 2 as far as I know, but 2 can also be 1. Right, so me'enecha, oh no, excuse me, me'enaich is a female. Me'enaich, and that means from your eyes. Ayin is eye. So a single glance of the bride's eyes make his heart beat faster. Our job is to figure out what's going on with the eyes, because if I can get the eye thing right, I can make my creator's heart beat faster for me. Wouldn't you want that from him? And the second thing that will make his heart beat faster is actually going to be the clue that opens up the eyes. Anak is a strand. He says, with a single strand of your necklace. And you're thinking, which one? He's like, no, not that kind of necklace, not that kind of necklace. Because remember, sometimes in scripture, and this one, it pays to keep your a journal of biblical symbols. A personal one, not in a dictionary or reference book that you have to go look up. A personal one, because if you'll write it out, you'll remember it. Sometimes it's people who are put on as ornaments. So people can be a metaphor for ornaments, and ornaments can be a metaphor for people, just like trees can be people, and people can be trees. So with this ornamentation of the necklace, there's a single strand in that necklace that makes his heart beat faster. And the weird word for that strand is anak. And if you've heard the word anak before, you probably heard it not this way. You've probably heard of the Anakim, the giants. The giants, the Anakim. Well, he's not impressed with giants. We can go ahead and discard that particular interpretation. We know it doesn't fit in the context. But it can be a giant among people, somebody who stands head and shoulders above the rest. So if we already have established that at Mount Sinai, Israel was the bride. She became betrothed at Mount Sinai. She received the Sabbath as a sign of her betrothal. He wants her to look at him in a specific way. The Anak is said to be Moses, because he was the spiritual giant in that necklace called Israel that he is putting on as his adornment. Because if you remember, when they sinned with the golden calf, Moses comes down the mountain and says, take your jewelry off. Jewelry signifies the bride. Clearly, you're not behaving so. He makes them take off their jewelry because they were his ornaments. And now they've committed idolatry/adultery with the golden calf. So the strand who steps in and intercedes for the necklace, so to speak, for Israel is Moses. He is the only one that is standing between Israel and total destruction. And he says, if you're going to blot them out of your book, blot my name out of your book. He just offers himself. He's a type of Messiah there. You know, just take me too, if you're not going to pull them out. And so he is the one who's considered the giant. In fact, we know that the Torah came to be called Moses in some cases. You can see that in the New Testament, because he was the one who taught the people the covenant to keep them out of that trouble. Like, okay, you messed up. Clearly, I can't turn my back on you. let me teach you these instructions. And you can prepare yourselves as the bride, right? So ayin is singular, I, but you've got two of them. Einaim. Ayin, einaim. Ozen, oznaim. Shen, shnaim. Teeth. Right. So a lot of your body parts are going to be in twos. If there's two of them, that's the way you do it. So einaim. And the Midrash takes this, says there's a particular way that he's speaking to his bride here by using the word ayin. It's a multi-purpose word because it also means a fountain or a spring, a fresh fountain or spring, not something that's closed up and polluted, something that's ever fresh. And it's hinting, they say, to that purity of heart that he's using in the verse. You have made my heart beat faster. There's a purity in his bride that's making his heart beat, like it's pounding. You know, we can only compare that to the way we feel when we're in love and our heart pounds when that person gives us the glance or rides by on his motorcycle. But imagine exponentially how much the heart would beat on his end. If there's something about us he finds desirable, wow, we're not even scratching the surface of a heartbeat of being in love the way that his heart beats. So that they say that one heart was given to him when Israel followed Adonai into the wilderness, where he says, I remember the love of your betrothal, how you followed me into a land not sown. They didn't know. It'd been decades, hundreds of years since they had gone in that direction. And they just said, okay, we'll just take our matzah and travel on. And he said, that's love. When you trusted me before you really knew anything, before you could even prepare anything, they just had to throw the dough on their backs and go, dough and go. And then another heart, they said, was given when the Mishkan was erected, because remember, it drew down his presence where the bridegroom could be with them. And at the center, at that Holy of Holies, of course, is his commandments, the covenant, the relationship, the document describing the relationship between the bride and the bridegroom. And that again occurred through the intercession of the giant of his generation, Moses, Anak. If he hadn't interceded, there wouldn't be a Mishkan. They'd all be gone. And he said, I'll start over with you, Moses. So his strand did stick out above the others. So when we look at the Holy One with clear eyes, that clear fountain, remember that Torah, it's a fountain of living water. Yeshua identified himself as that fountain of living water. He says, I'm the Word. When we look at the Holy One with the eyes of a true bride, how are we doing it? Through obedience to Moses. Moses teaches us our covenant. And when we're trying to obey the covenant, he sees no blemish. Remember what it said? There is no blemish in you. And we may not be done yet. There might be lots of commandments we haven't learned or perfected yet. And yet, because a fountain flows every day, even those days when we mess up, that living water of Yeshua can wash it out. Just like I was trying to describe to people about preparing tadik, rice. If you're going to make Persian rice, you have to keep rinsing it till the cloudiness, till the starch is gone. So that's going to make it good. It's going to make it tasty. And this is what Yeshua does for us. He keeps rinsing us, rinsing the starch out of us. So we won't be so starchy. And in the end, it's something beautiful. And so if we will look at him with our einaim, with a single glance of our eyes, like good eye, bad eye, like you don't want to be like, when I go that way, when I go that way. Okay. Because you never know which eye to look at when that happens. But if we have a single glance, it's because we're single-minded, James describes. James is really describing this. One glance of your eyes. Why? Because your heart, your mind, your body, everything is in unity. It's in obedience. And you're looking at him and saying, I love your Shabbat. I love your commandments. I love my wife. I would never lay my eyes on that thing over there. I'm going to keep my eyes straight ahead through this section of the highway or wherever these temptations are coming. You know what, I could fudge a little bit over here, but you know what? I'm not going to fudge on my books because stealing, that's mud in the water. I want to look at you with the clear eyes. I want to have these two glances, the glance not just of a fresh fountain, but that glance of obedience to your word. When we obey him, we make his heart beat faster. Wow. So another time these two fountains are related. There's two times when the qualities of the Israelite women, and that's what you'll notice in these examples, is you'll have some examples that are more male and some that are more female. Like you might have Pinchas, the holy warrior, but then you'll have Israel as the bride, as the feminine. And he'll use both masculine and feminine examples to help us assemble an understanding of the whole. So there's twice in the wilderness when the women were outstanding examples of a pure fountain. It's when they guarded both sexual and spiritual purity. And so in this sort of example, as we're looking at Israel as the bride, it's in that feminine rather than seeing Israel as a son, which is used sometimes. But the ayin, you can see sometimes, yes, it is the eye, the literal eye. Sometimes it is a spring or a fountain. Now, we're getting into delicate territory here. We got kids and we got anybody who could be listening to a video later. So we're just, as adults, we're going to understand what we're talking about. Okay, you can explain it to the kids later. You're welcome. But in the Torah, there's a very delicate reference to a woman's reproductive area. It's called her fountain. And that fountain is reserved for her husband alone. That area is only for the bridegroom. It's not to be on display. It's not to be shared with anyone else. That is her fountain. It's a place where life comes from. So I want to give you an example. This is in Proverbs 25:26. It says, a righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. In this example, he'll give you both. One is more subtle than the other. You'll notice the feminine reference is much more subtle than the male because it comes right out and says a righteous man who falls down before the wicked is like his feminine counterpart, which is put a little more delicately. Now remember, ayin is a fountain, and it is an equivalent expression to another word for spring or fountain, which is makor. Makor. And so again, I put that in Hebrew and I put it in red so you could see the equivalence of expression there. You could see Mayan compared to makor, where the fountain, the spring, the eyes can be compared to this makor, to this other kind of fountain. Leviticus 20 verse 18 shows us how it works. It explains this proverb. If there is a man who lies with a menstruous woman and uncovers her nakedness, he has laid bare her flow, mekorah. Hear the word makor there, mekorah? And she has exposed the flow, makor, of her blood. Thus, both of them shall be cut off from among their people. Now, this verse implies that there's a mutual agreement to transgress, right? And there's been a meeting of the minds here, that they are going to transgress this commandment. But it points out the problem with what's happening, that it is her fountain that has been laid bare, that it's in a state of shedding, that it had prepared for life, and then when there was no conception, she has to shed that in order to make the way for new life. And he is actually impairing that process. This action is impairing that preparation for life. That fountain has to flow in order to purify it. Just like I was describing the rice, how you have to let the fresh water flow through the rice in order to remove the debris, anything that might be there that doesn't need to be there. Well, this is the way that a woman's body purifies her physical body. And it has a spiritual principle associated with it, just like we're talking about Yeshua being that living fountain. His word will flow that water through us. But this particular act would be something that would impair that. Okay. So when a righteous man falls down before the wicked, I kind of laid it out for you where it would be easier to see. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is, as it says, a troubled fountain. Troubled means like fouled and muddy. Have you ever been in a creek after a herd of cows went through it? Or even on the edge of a pond where the cows have just been swimming. That they don't just swim when they get in the pond. They leave a lot of nasty things behind. And he says it's like that. When a righteous man sheds his righteousness in order to sin in front of the wicked, he's fouling his fountain. And then it says, and a corrupt spring. That word for corrupt there, it means decaying, morally corrupt or perverted. So he's using the masculine and the feminine to help us understand that if we're walking in righteousness and somehow we're letting the wicked in the world begin to affect us to the point that we actually fall, they're stumbling. You can do a whole lot of stumbling and bumbling around, but what if we actually fall in front of them? Now you've muddied the waters and the world doesn't know what to think. They're better off if they're clear about who we are and we're clear about who they are. If we're clear about Moses and walking in Moses, we shouldn't be muddying the waters. Because when we start interacting with the wickedness of the world, it's like the relations with the menstruous woman. You're impairing the process of life. You're muddying the spring. You're entering into something that's decayed and morally corrupt and perverted. And now the wicked, who need us to be clear, all they see now is mud. It's like a herd of cows just stomped through the creek. And they don't even know now where righteousness is because you fell down. You started doing things like they did. Sounds pretty bad. Maybe we're getting closer to finding out why the bridegroom's so upset. So the two occurrences in the wilderness where it said the women maintained the pure fountain on behalf of the nation. First of all, it's as they're approaching the visitation there at Mount Sinai. Remember, Moses goes and tells them they have 3 days to purify their clothes, purify themselves, and be ready. They needed that little bit of extra time for the women to be ready. And again, because you would have to explain it to the kids, I won't explain it to you. But the women needed the full 3 days in order to prepare. He wanted every man, woman, and child to be present at the giving of the 10 words. And so the rabbis say what happened is the way that the whole nation could stand there is because the women locked their husbands out, so to speak. I know there's no blocks on a tent, but you understand they locked them out because they said the men would have been tempted. But the women realized what was about to happen, And they cut it off. Like, no, we're going to purify for 3 days here. The second time, they say it was during the time of the golden calf. And you may say, well, what about the sin with the Midianite women? Well, it wasn't really a temptation for the women. The Midianite women were going after the men. So it was no real big deal for them to maintain their purity if there's no real temptation there. They weren't the target, in other words. But the second time, they say, is during the sin of the golden calf. And remember, Aaron tells them to go get the jewelry from their women and children. They say the women wouldn't give it up. They would not take off their gold jewelry and give it to them to make a golden calf. And of course, this is according to tradition. But they say, well, the men were engaging. It says, they sat down to eat and rose up to play. It's a sexual type of play. I have no idea what they were doing, and I don't want to know. But while they were engaged in this idolatry, the women did not participate. And so the rabbis say this is the second time when the women of Israel kind of, I don't want to say manned up. That wouldn't be really. They womaned up and they said, we're going to maintain not only our moral purity, we're going to also retain our spiritual purity. And they say the single-hearted devotion was Israel purifying herself before she signed onto the covenant. And then once she signs on at Mount Sinai with we will do and we will hear, now she maintains her purity to her betrothed. So it's kind of a before and after. And the women are that symbolic picture. They prepared before in purity. And then once they signed on the ketubah and said, we will do it, then they said they maintained it in the wilderness. And not giving herself to other gods was like a picture of Israel, being that without blemish, being that bride that makes his heart beat faster. So back to the question. Why are those curses so intense in Torah portion of Chukotai? Why is it so loving starting out and then just such terrible horror in the curses? Like we said, it goes back to the sevens. It goes back to that sign of our betrothal and the purity of our glance that should go with it. Your Sabbath is going to say a whole lot about what goes on in the rest of your life with the Holy One. Because you're going to major on what he majors on, and you're going to minor on what he minors on. So these sevenfold punishments, because they have not observed the Sabbath, the Shemitah, the Yovel, it's actually for the sake of the bride that the curses come. And it doesn't sound like we want that to be for our sake. That's for me. Please don't feel obligated, to chase me with the sword and plague and pestilence and all that. But actually, it's for our good. Because remember, he wants us to dwell in the garden. He wants our souls to love what he loves. And some, just like some children, they're just naturally, they're going to do what their parents say. They have a good heart. Well, the ones who are stubborn, they need a little more convincing sometimes. Sometimes you have to put your foot down. And in this case, he's trying to gather up every child, every member of the bride, because again, he wants to dwell with her in his garden. He wants his heart to beat for her instead of being constantly dismayed by her. So let's go back to verse 12 of the Song of Songs. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. The Garden State ain't New Jersey. So we got some hints here in Song of Songs 4:12 through 15. And the hint is going to be that Jerusalem, as we understand it, is part of the garden below. But there is a garden above. that hovers just above Jerusalem. And it's longing to once again be married, the natural and the spiritual. But it can't be remarried as long as the fountain is muddy and morally perverted. Once the spring down here is cleaned and cleared up, then this can once again touch this. But his holiness is not going to be able to touch a perverted bride, a rebellious bride, a bride who has not guarded her fountain. Now, the king's garden is kind of helping us. If we can look at some things in Jerusalem, it might help us visualize what it's like up here in the Garden of Eden. We're told that the king's garden is at the base of the Jerusalem Valley Sheen. There is a Hebrew letter Sheen that's formed of the valleys of Jerusalem. You've got the Kidron over here between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives. That's one side. It's the right side of the Sheen. You've got this side coming out, the Hinnom Valley, or Gehinnom, hell, and it's the trash valley. And then going right up through it, which you can't see it today because it's built on top of, but is the Tyropian Valley, and that's probably the Valley of Decision. That's where the multitudes hang out, is in the Valley of Decision. They want to make that up the steps to the temple. And so the king's garden during the time of Solomon was at the base of that Jerusalem Valley Sheen. And down there is a pool. I've done it once. I went through Hezekiah's tunnel, and I don't want to do that again unless there's a burning bush that tells me to. They said the water would be up to our ankles. Negative. Yeah, my pants were soaked. Turned my ankle. You can't see in there. It's dark. It's worth doing once. But the tunnel from the Gihon spring comes out into the pool of Siloam, or Shelach in Hebrew. And Nehemiah 3, 12, and 15 describe that particular pool. Because remember, this is where the king's garden is. The king's garden is above. Where is it down here? Jerusalem. But this gives us a really precise location in terms of natural, latitude and longitude and drop a pin and all that. It says, and this is the time of the restoration when they've come back from Babylon. Next to him, Shallum, the son of Halochesh, the official of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs. He and his daughters. I had to put that in there. He and his daughters. Shallum, and that's pretty odd when you look at all the other descriptions of the people who repaired things. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, some dude's daughters are involved in the rebuilding of the wall, the sealed wall around Jerusalem. Is that starting to make sense? Shallum, the son of Kochozeh, the official of the district of Mitzpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. The beloved is a garden locked and sealed. And the wall of the pool of Shelach at the king's garden, as far as the steps that descend from the city of David. And so from that pool, you could immerse in temple times, do your ritual immersion, and then you started walking up the stairs to the temple. Or you could hang a left and go into the Valley of Decision. Or you could take a hard left and go into the Hinnom Valley. Feels like we're in a hard left right now. Now, the pool of Shelach, or Sion, translates from Hebrew as sent. Sent. You can look at John 9:7 for a little reference there. But it's confirmed archaeologically that the pool that's there today was, in fact, the historical pool of Shelach. And so if you're in that area where they're excavating today, you know you were in the area of the king's garden. And it would have grown right there, approximately where the Hinnom Valley joins with the Kidron Valley. It's basically hot or cold right there. And it truly is a place of decision. Where you go from there matters, because there's really only 3 destinations. Go to the temple, go to hell, go to the valley of decision and hang out with the lukewarm, with the intermediates. And Yeshua says it's better for those over in Hinnom than the ones in the valley of decision. Yikes. Because see, in the valley of decision, it's right under the Temple Mount, right under it. In fact, there's little bridges over it, so the priest could walk up there. But you could be down there, kind of like where the Kotel is today. You could hear what's going on up there. You could hear the Levitical choirs. You could hear the prayers. You could hear the singing and the shouting and the celebration. And you would be close, kind of like the rich man and Lazarus. You'd be close, but you're not there. You're just hanging out. Shalom was a descendant of Shem, by the way. And so here's a little map that'll show you the Sheen, the 3 branches of the Sheen. So it shows you where the temple was located. And so you can imagine there, see where the Kidron and the Hinnom Valley meet down there at the bottom. That'll tell you approximately where the King's Garden was. How far it extended around the Pool of Shalach, we don't know, because there's just too much stuff on top of it right now. But I think what's important is this right here. That we remember that Pool of Shalach was fed by the Gihon spring. And that Gihon River is in Eden above. And so being in that physical location is to be in a physical location, but to understand how close you are to the King's Garden above. And, you know, he wants us back there in the garden. He wants us, remember Hezekiah, that you may not know this, but the rabbis say that Hezekiah was almost the Messiah, almost. Just didn't have everything it took. But Hezekiah was the one who had that tunnel dug from the Gihon spring up to the King's Garden. He made a way. He made a way. So if Israel pursues the justice of the bridegroom's marriage instructions in the land of Israel, and particularly in Jerusalem, his holy city, it's part of completing her preparation. You know, the bridegroom doesn't come till the bride's ready. Sometimes they made marriage agreements when the kids were just babies way back then. And why they had to wait till they grew up. You might be betrothed your whole life before you ever completed the marriage. So the preparation has to be complete for that upper and lower Jerusalem to reunite, as in the garden. The bride has to be willing to live in him instead of die in her mind desires with the beast of the field. Why do I say mine? Well, that was one of the neat things about the little video that Rabbi Foreman did this week on what's God so angry about. Because the one thing the bride could not have in the garden, what did she say? Mine. Mine. Remember Finding Nemo? Mine, mine, mine. We want it all. He says, no, you can't have that. Mine, I can do that. How many questions do we have about scripture? So well, does it really say that? Well, we wouldn't ask that question if we hadn't already decided we want to do that thing, and we just need somebody to give us an interpretation of that verse so that it's okay that we do it. Mine? He's no, don't do that. Mine? So we want to take everything in his garden and make it ours. And he's actually given us everything but one thing. There's very little that he has not given to us. But everything he gives to us is life. He's not going to give us something that will kill us. That's the great thing about having a good husband. He's never going to do something on purpose to kill you. The Holy One is the perfect husband. He's never going to give us something that will kill us. He might scare us to death, but he's not going to kill us, right? So instead of saying, your will be done in this garden, Adam and Eve say, mine. I'm going to look at what the beast of the field desires. I'm going to confuse myself with this beast and think it's okay for me to also think this way. But instead, we have to live in his commandments. We have to be married. We have to be joined. We have to be of one, not just one body. When you're married, you have to be of one mind. And this is what the bridegroom wants. He wants the bride to join him in the garden in the cool of the evening. He wants the bride, remember, the 7 spirits. He wants his bride to walk in his spirit with him. And our problem is we're too busy out here in the field saying, mine, 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 mine. Whatever he hasn't given me, I'll figure out a way to make it mine. And he says, no, you're not ready for the garden if it's still your field. And so Bechukotai is showing us this process of repentance, and that because he had to implement it, he had to follow us all the way into the exile, waiting for us to quit saying mine. And he's going to follow us until we quit saying mine and we say his. So the garden is not a minefield. It's his field. And when we cease to treat this earth of our exile as the minefield, that's when we're going to be ready to be placed in a sealed garden. In a garden state above, where the fountain is pure, it's fresh, it's clear, it's full of life. The longer we say mine, the longer we play in the mud. So in a nutshell, the Sabbaths, the Shemitah, the Yovel, these 7s, they're a way for Israel to return to the garden. It's a signal, we're ready, we're with you. It's no longer our field, it's your field, and we're going to relinquish it back to you at these times to show you we mean it. When you observe these 7s, it reverses the mind mentality of Adam and Eve toward the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It reminds those who are observing these 7s that Elohim is the creator of the earth. It's his field. All its fullness, from the seed to the human being, it doesn't matter. It's all his. And all he's saying is, give me back some space and time here. Just give me a little space and time. That's all he asked for in the Garden of Eden. This little space with this tree in it is not yours. Maybe it would be in time. Maybe they would have developed where they could handle it. Who knows? But for that time and that space, it was not theirs. But space and time are the things the earth routinely digs to exploit. People like that can't be a bride. By obeying the commandments, the bride is saying, I am trustworthy. You can plant me in this locked and sealed garden. The spring I will protect. I will protect the Holy of Holies. I will reserve that relationship for my bridegroom and me alone. There's certain things that the world and the wicked are not entitled to. And I will protect these commandments. So why would the bridegroom be so angry? Well, obviously, there's many among the bride who have fouled the fountains with minds. He sent her away. He says, I'm going to chastise you because I love you. I want you to come back to me, and I'm not getting your attention this way. So I'll try to get your attention the other way. And still, after sending her away, some ignored the covenant. They're still saying, mine. They don't get it. They're in exile. But in exile, when his bride repents and earnestly tries to return to the commandments, this, I believe, is what's making him angry. The nations have inhibited that return. The nations have thrown every obstacle, every roadblock they possibly can to our keeping the commandments. How many things are there that you would like to do on Shabbat that you can't do because it's not yours? Mine. I want mine to be what his is. It's not mine to do whatever I want. It's his to do whatever he wants to do through me. And therefore it limits maybe shopping. It limits bearing burdens. It limits things because it's his Shabbat. We delight in your Shabbat. It's not mine. I have to learn what he loves. And if he loves it, I love it too. But the nations will lay down every obstacle to prevent your entering into the rest of Shabbat. Every event, every sale, we know the list because we've been walking in it, haven't we? We've all got our own list of things that we had to maybe set aside for Shabbat. They're enticing her to fall like the wicked man so that the waters are muddy. Because out of all those people in the world, some are truly wicked. They're trying to make you fall. So you will have perverted, morally corrupt water that nobody can tell anything about. But a certain number of those out there need you to walk in purity. So they will know the difference between the truly wicked and those who are just walking in wickedness because they don't know any better. And if they see better, they might turn and walk in it with you. And so in these two things, the bride is repented. The bride is trying to keep his 10 words, that covenant. They can't keep the Shemitah and the Yovel in exile, but they can keep the Shabbat. That's one thing that they can hold on to. That's all we got left in terms of the sevens, folks. We're not going to give up that one thing because it tells him, I'm ready for the garden. I need to be in that garden with you. I want to experience your presence. And so why is he angry? The world is preventing. The world is throwing obstacles in his bride's path. Men, don't you get upset when people pick on your wife? You probably get more upset if they pick on your wife than if they pick on you. If they call your wife ugly names, doesn't it make you more angry than if they would say the same word to you? Aren't you more likely to mix it up with somebody if it's your wife? Of course, if you're normal, because she's part of you. We are part of him. And he is angry at what the world is doing to his betrothed, to prevent her from looking at him with those clear eyes and making his heart beat fast. He wants us in that garden with him. So, and then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit for the sake of time to the one where it says, vengeance is mine. In class next week, we're going to talk about the 10 clothes of Adonai. You have 10 sets of clothes he can put on. I'm not going to go into that today, but when he puts on those 10 clothes, there is an act of vengeance associated with each one. Those clothes are very specifically to redeem the name of his bride. And guys, we should walk worthy of that redemption. But for human beings, we're not that trustworthy with something like vengeance. The Holy One, when he puts on his clothes of vengeance, it will be pure. What happens will be absolute truth. What we're called to is justice, not vengeance. Deuteronomy 32:35 warns us, says, vengeance is mine and retribution in due time. For the day of their calamity is near and the impending things are hastening upon them. Vengeance belongs to him. It's mentioned twice in the New Testament. Paul tells the Romans, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Hebrews 10:30, we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. So he will judge his own people with vengeance, and he will judge the nations eventually with vengeance. When his bride comes back to him, his wrath is going to be turned on the nations. The wrath of the Lamb is coming. But our job, I know we can be disheartened if we watch the news sometimes. If we watch what's going on around us, we can be disheartened. And we want to take vengeance on his behalf. We think we're Pinchas. I'll pick up a spear and I'll just run it through them. I'll rip their tongues out of their mouths. I'll wipe that grin off of their faces. But here's what we're told in Deuteronomy 16:20. Justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So no matter what goes on out in the world, our job is justice. His vengeance will take care of all of that. It's too dangerous for us to handle, even though we feel like it sometimes. So that kind of wraps up what I wanted to share. And I hope that gives you a little better insight as to why the curses are so severe. It's for our good. It's to bring us to a place of repentance no matter where we are. To plant in our hearts a desire to learn what he loves. And when we learn what he loves and we do what he loves, that's the glance, that's that single-minded heart. We look to him and his heart beats fast. And guess what? He has a real heart. We don't. We think we have a heart. We think we have a hand. We think we have a head. We have parables. That's all we are. We're only the image of Elohim. That's all. We think this is real. It's not. The reality is found in Messiah. The reality is found in the heavenlies. We want to understand a hand. We look at Yeshua as the hand of Elohim. We want to understand his heart. His is the real heart. Ours is the image of a heart. Ours is the parable of a heart. So what little bit we know about our hearts, what makes our heart beat faster with joy? He wants us to look at him with pure eyes from a pure fountain. And that's going to make his heart beat faster for us. He wants to be with us again. His presence longs for us. And gentlemen, if you've ever been separated from your wife for a long time, do you remember the longing to be back with her as the weeks stretched on? Well, it's been several thousand years since he could be with his bride. I can understand why he'll be a little bent out of shape with anybody who's kept them apart with sin with obstacles, by putting out minefields for his faithful to walk through. He doesn't want it to be this hard for us. He wants you to love what he loves so much that it's not hard at all, just to walk in his word. So I'm going to say goodbye to our live streamers here. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll close out our service here. We love you guys. We'll see you back next week. B'ezrat Hashem.